The year 2020 was supposed to be a year of endless possibilities and economic prosperity. But right now, when we look back, the year has been one with a lot of uncertainties, a lot of turmoil, as well as economic disruptions across the globe. And all of it has had some way or the other a link to the COVID pandemic that has actually taken all the economies across the globe to a standstill. 2020 was also supposed to be a year that was to be packed with a lot of high profile activities, including the Expo 2020 and even a very powerful as well as influential American presidential elections. Now, we need to actually understand that a recession that would be triggered by the COVID pandemic is not just a fear, it is a reality. And it is soon knocking at our doors. So we take a quick look at how similar is a COVID-triggered recession to the Great Depression of the early 1930s, and what are the key similarities and differences with the Great Depression. The Great Depression in the United States of America was primarily triggered by the fundamental collapse of the banking system in the country. Even when the businesses were open to accept more orders as well as to continue the production, there wasn't a banking system to provide capital. But in today's scenario, you have the financial institutions in place, and hence that is one of the biggest differences that you can find right now. And on top, the stimulus packages, as declared by the government during the 1930 crisis, would stand moot in the present scenario, as putting money in people's pocket as well as cutting taxes would be of no use, as the businesses that are the hit are hardest are literally shut shop. So in a recent desperate measure, the United States has also cut the interest rates by 150 basis points in a single week. And the Senate has also approved a $2 trillion stimulus package. And the point of concern is that the interest rate cut was not accompanied by any proactive measures. I think the interest rate would only ensure a better ease of doing things, but that doesn't always ensure a better willingness to pay from the part of the citizens of the country. And another major concern is the liquidity crisis becoming into a solvency crisis. The current worldwide scenario is unprecedented as a stop down of major economic activities in countries who were only witnessed in those with high political instabilities, countries that go on war, or countries that have been affected by natural calamities. But in this case, the same scenario exists around the world. In in the current scenario, when you have reduced cash flows and you have a maturing debt in hand, it creates a serious financial stress for the firms on the large, and this can mean higher rate of unemployment, deeper recession, as well as a permanent scar on the global economy. And it would be interesting to know that some of the industries stood to benefit out of this crisis, while some industries took the hit really hard. The most obvious benefiters of this crisis is obviously the pharma industry, especially in its quest for finding a vaccine that would cure the corona pandemic. They have been actually drawing a lot of funds with research in terms of the R&D spends across the governments as well and corporations. And also the production of personal protective equipment as well as the testing kits as well as hand sanitizers has been on the rise. And even you find other industries even diversifying into the production of low cost ventilators as well as personal protective equipments. And second industry that has benefited from the crisis is the logistics and delivery industry, especially when people have been locked up in their homes. There has been a huge demand from the citizens with respect to the service requirements of essential supplies as well as medical supplies. And this has actually called for a better integration of the logistics networks existing across the country. On the online business front, platforms like Zoom and Skype and WebEx has also stood to take advantage of the situation when most of the businesses that were operated out of commercial spaces have been pushed back to home spaces as well as the isolated quarantine spaces. And another thing that came along with the crisis was the heavy burden of boredom, which was actually alleviated by online streaming services as well as gaming platforms, which include the likes of Netflix, Disney, Hotstar, and another few. And the major industries that took the hardest hit from this crisis, obviously starting from the airline industry, where most of the fleet has to be grounded and even the staff had been cut short to almost 70 to 90%, as in the case of Air France, KLM, and British Airways, etc. And even the passenger and freight charges that would have been, or revenue that would have been earned in the case of trains as well as the cruise ships, especially luxury cruise ships, has been hardly hit. And this has taken a serious toll on the tourism industry. And another major industry that has been seriously hit would be the oil and gas industry, especially with the demand for transportation coming down drastically, especially with the regular travel restrictions imposed by various governments across the globe. As we speak, even the crude oil is being traded below $25 a barrel. And as per forecast, the world is also set to see a decline in oil demand since 2009 crisis. So the path of returning to normalcy would ideally be, in my opinion, in three phases. The first one would be the emergency response. Obviously, the phase will continue as long as we find a permanent as well as a reliable cure for the COVID pandemic, and as long as it has been contained, and as long as there has been no fresh cases being reported, this phase is to continue. And most of the time as well as the resources of the corporates as well as governments across the globe would be ideally after this, because it has been posing a serious threat not just on the economy but also the very existence of mankind. And once the fear has settled down, then obviously it would be the role of the governments as well as the central banks to set in with in terms of their fiscal as well as monetary policies to help the balance sheet crisis as well as reactivating the economic engine. And dealing with the consequences, obviously the companies would start think ways beyond efficiency, cost effectiveness, but more of resilience, especially contingency measures to take stock of any other unexpected uh, pandemics in future or any other disruptions that might cause a serious impact on the way we run the business. And the third phase would be dealing with the kind of changed landscape the pandemic has created. And I'm very much confident that not just economic, the very global landscape will never be the same again. Because even during the times of recession, only the people were put out of jobs and there were lack of money in people's pockets. But this time, not just were people forced out of jobs and did it drain their pockets, but also they were forced to change their very behavioral habits. And obviously, this would have a deep impact on the businesses of the future. Especially in the coming days, there would be a huge demand for cybersecurity, with most offices working in confined spaces, and especially for force majeure clauses in the contracts as well as insurance, obviously, because most of the businesses would have to take into account all the disruptions and other contingencies. Even in the white good category, you would find a huge demand for items like deep freezers and very high volume refrigerators, with people being confined to spaces and having a requirement to stock food for a longer duration. Another interesting insight that I would like to drive would be the lack of demand for commercial spaces in the coming immediate future, as well as an interesting, but there would be a high demand for computer peripherals, especially in terms of laptops, headphones, as well as computer keypads, mouses, etc. And also for home office furnitures, which is likely to find a surge in the coming days once the pandemic fear has been settled down. And another interesting development that the pandemic has created over the time is actually the collaboration between companies that were entirely different in the operations, but that were able to find common synergies which they can use in the coming years, especially citing the example of ITC using the delivery infrastructure of Domino's to cater to essential supplies. So that is one particular development that we can see in the coming future, where entirely different business organizations coming together in collaboration and utilizing their synergies to make best use of the opportunities out there. So, considering all the major points that have been mentioned so far, obviously the impact of the crisis would be lasting longer than the Great Depression or the 2008-9 crisis, but definitely there is a bounce back to normalcy, and this time we are better equipped to go back, if not in a V parameter, but obviously in a U-shaped parameter, and even with the kind of stimulus that has been taken care by the government across the globe, it is expected the normalcy would return sooner than expected. So we can hope for a better tomorrow once the entire crisis subsides. Thank you.